noticed you've got a song called Right to Life, and which you released wrote a few years ago. But I wanted to ask about that. What made you write that song, and what did you want to achieve with that?
So at the time, it was just about like obviously veganism is a big thing, so it's a big part of my life, and just in terms of the environmental impact of meat consumption, the cruelty to any and all animals. I particularly dislike things like zoos, over like wildlife parks and stuff like that. Like I totally understand that some zoos are conservation, but most of them are dire. And I think around that time, this was back in sort of 2017, 2018. I was still living in London, or largely in London. And I remember walking down, the Camden Canal goes past the London Zoo, and you can see, so it's like you can see into the zoo.
Mm.
You see all of these pens of like hyenas and stuff, and they're so small in comparison to the miles and miles of habitat that they would normally have. People are like, oh no, they're big cages and stuff. I'm like, but there's cages, and they still can't do anything about the fact that they're never going to have the amount of space that naturally they should have to roam and stuff. And so I think a lot of the lyrics came about from that. And it was like, well, what if humans were locked up in cages? What if we were made to have sex with each other in front of an audience? Like, what if every minutiae of our existence was under a microscope for animal entertainment? And that's kind of the spin I took with the lyrics and stuff.
Were you vegan already then? Or what was it that first made you realize that all animals had a right to life?
Mm. So I was vegetarian for a really long time before I committed to veganism in Veganuary of 2017.
Yeah.
Um, but prior to that, I was vegetarian for a long time, and before that, I'd gone pescatarian. I'd done the whole journey of cutting out various animal products over a really, really long time. Um, and the less you eat, the more interested you are in the processes of it, because you're no longer attached to it on your plate. You no longer want that desensitization of what's on your plate. You don't, it doesn't have to be there anymore. So I became a lot more aware of things. And then, of course, you start researching the things you still have on your plate. And it's just this whole hellhole, isn't it? And it's a rabbit hole that you end up going down. And I could no longer justify any of those things being anywhere near me.
Yeah. And I love that you have this Hunt Sabs on tour with you, and you're giving proceeds from some t-shirts to them. Why would you say the Hunt Sabs are important and deserve to be supported?
Because no animal deserves to be ripped apart by dogs. No animal deserves to be run into the ground with exhaustion in order to be a trophy on a wall, or a coat, um, or sport for your pack of animals that can quite easily have exercise without needing to trace something that's alive. Um, it's just such an outdated, privileged, white tradition, and it's just so unnecessary. It's not necessary for the countryside. The reason they have to cull deer is because at a rate capitalists are removing their habitat, and so this culling is because there's no longer enough space for the animals, but we don't actually need the housing or anything else that's happening with the land when there's so many empty buildings and empty houses already. So yeah, there isn't a single excuse that they can throw at me that could possibly make me feel that there isn't a need for the Hunt Sabs to be there stopping it.
Have they had Hunt Sabs had much support from the fans at your shows?
Oh yeah, I mean, my fan base know that I'm vegan. Well, actually, the whole band, the three of us are vegan, one's vegetarian, so we're all very much on the same page about animal cruelty and animal rights and stuff. And so the fan base can't get away from it. So if they disagreed with that, it would be a bit weird. Um, I There's only been a couple of people that have been like, "Oh, I couldn't have meat on my plate," and I'm like, "You're talking to the wrong person." Like, and they pretty quickly just stop talking to me about that kind of stuff. But largely people have been buying their merchandise and having really good conversations with them, and it's been really lovely to see our community come together with their community and, you know, perpetuate the idea that hunting needs to stop.
Do you know, have you inspired any people? Have any fans come to you and said that you inspired them to stop eating meat?
No, I've definitely not had anybody tell me that they've become vegan, but we have had a couple of fans join up to be hunt sabs. So
Oh,
that's really cool. So I don't know. I'm not the sort of vegan that tries to actively persuade other people to stop eating meat. Like, I feel strongly that everybody needs to come to their own conclusions and have their own choices around, and especially around food, because food is such an important part of culture, of feeling good about yourself, community. And I think that on both sides of the table, there's too much people being angry at each other. And that just needs to stop, because, I mean, shaming people for their food often leads to other issues with mental health and things anyway, right? So no, I've not had anybody come and say that to me. It would be really cool if that happened, but it's not something that I'm particularly looking for.
you did tweet that old men had sent you playground insults for
Yeah.
believing ripping animals apart shouldn't be a thing. Why do you think some people just don't care about animals, and some of these guys are cruel to inflict cruelty on the animals?
I think that's a huge part of British culture, um, and privileged white culture in general, for centuries. And so I think generationally, you get people who are completely desensitized. You get people who, I think there's definitely part of those groups where they are scared of the knowledge. They don't want the knowledge because they will have to face up to the things that they do that aren't okay. And you get plenty of people who just see animals as almost as they see their car. You know, it's a thing that is a means to an end. It's a working animal. And you even get some people, I mean, I can't remember who the MP was, but they were talking about how they don't believe that animals feel pain, you know, or emotion. And it's insane that there's so many people out there that really don't understand just how sentient and intelligent even some of the smallest animals are. You know, rats can learn to read and take cues and do as many tricks as a dog can. So pigs have the intelligence of a 4-year-old, but lots of people, I think, don't want to know that because that would affect their daily life too much, and it would make them face so many of the awful things that they have done to animals in the name of hunting or tradition or whatever. I think it would cause them a lot of internal harm that they would have to face. So I think a lot of people don't want to.
Yeah. So you have a song on telling truths, breaking ties called Silent Screams. And I know that's more about mental health and depression and anxiety and think what you've been through. But on the subject of animals, do you think many animals are silently screaming, like, the animals that are tested on in laboratories and things like that?
I don't think they're silently screaming. I think they're absolutely loudly screaming. I mean, if you look at some of the documents that you can find about people that stopped working in laboratories like that because it was affecting their own mental health, people that can no longer work in abattoirs because of the screams of the animals, the tears running down the faces of cows as they wait to die, listening to their relatives dying. Like, there's thousands of accounts of people that have had to literally listen to very audible screams of animals, and unless they can desensitize themselves to that, then they're going to end up with huge mental health problems.
Yeah. And so moving on to silent screams and some other topics, how do you feel now? Do you feel better than when you wrote that song?
Oh, for sure. I mean, I had to go through a lot of self-reflection, medication, some therapy, time off work, time off touring, in order to pick apart some of the reasons for what was going on. And I certainly wouldn't say that I'm completely healed, and I certainly haven't dealt with all of the issues surrounding how I felt, but I'm definitely in a much better place, a much more stable place now than I was.
Is there anything specifically which you think has helped you lately?
I think it's really a combination of having a really good community, learning how and when to talk, letting my family in more, because I hadn't even, it wasn't until I had a breakdown that my family even understood that I had mental health illness. And also just learning to allow myself those days where I might not be the best, and be open about that, especially with my band on the road. Just be like, in fact, it happened the other day. I had to say to my band, listen, I'm feeling emotionally unstable today. I might not deal with situations in the way that you're used to me dealing with them, but if you could have patience with me, that would be great. And I'm very lucky that I have a band like that, that we all, to one extent or another, have had mental health illness. And so we all understand that if one of us says, this is what I need right now for the sake of my head, then we all understand that has to be, that has to be a priority and made allowances for.
That's good. So I listened to Chris DeMakes of Less Than Jake's podcast with you. That was just before the tour, I think. And, I was amazed at everything you talked about, and, how honest you are, and what you've been through. And I just wanted to say that I think you're amazing and the world needs you. So
thank you.
But so what sort of things can lift your mood or make you feel better? Is there anything you can go to? I don't know whether sometimes I'll go on YouTube to try and be inspired or something. Is there, or
if I'm having a really bad day, or if I'm sick in any capacity, whether that's physically or mentally, just old movies like 80s cult classics or Lord of the Rings or something like that, something that I have always enjoyed that could just be in the background, and even just like a line in one of the scenes, I only need to hear it and I'll know where we are in the film. And so I find a lot of joy in that kind of thing, like the escapism of movies that are just part of my nostalgia bank, if you will, because they're easy things. I don't have to think about them. There's no learning the story. It's already there. It's like reading one of your favorite books from being a kid, like it's always there. It's always easy to put on. There's always a smile or something funny or whatever within that. And yeah, a lot of the time that will be like a whole day of me just sitting and listening to the movies being on in the background.
So when you got your bandmates, your latest bandmates, and you've said it took a while to find hardworking, dedicated, and kind musicians. How did you initially discover that they were kind? Do you specifically search for vegans or veggies?
No, and since that interview, certainly one person in the band has changed. And it's an even kinder setup now. I think I learned the hard way how to gauge someone's personality in interview and audition stages. I learned the hard way that I needed to do the research and ask other people about people, and to not put up with bullshit, to lay very strict rules down about the fact that I won't put up with anybody being mean or unkind or not treating each person within the group as though they are a close family member. And that's how we work now, like everybody in the band knows that you treat someone like you're married to them. Like, you would never disrespect your wife or your husband or whatever. You would never let them feel like they're in pain or falling behind or unsupported. And so each person in the band gets treated exactly the same way as you would that person that you love. And so that's like a really hardcore rule for me. And if that's not happening, then they're probably not right for the band.
So what kind of things have people done for you in the music business? Do you think the music business is kind or unkind?
The music business is hard. It's hard on everybody. The UK music business is incredibly hard. You go over to the EU and you get food and accommodation and help with transport and all sorts of things. Once you get to our stage, you start to get more of that, but as a low level band, you get nothing when you're trying to start touring and stuff in the UK. But I mean, there's countless stories that I could think of where people have been kind. Just the other day, Pete, just my drummer, just stood there and hugged me while I sobbed on his shoulder, you know. And I messaged him because he'd also had George needing his help over the last 2 weeks because she's physically impaired. And I just messaged him and said, thank you for being there, for being that stability within the band, for both George and I to be able to lean on you at different points during those 2 weeks. And you just took it all, like, and you just held us up. And he was just like, well, yeah, of course, you're my buddies, you know. There's a promoter that we work with in Manchester, and every time that we work with him, he goes an extra mile to make sure that, like, George is actually allergic to all animal products, so she's vegan by physical default as well. And he will like check every ingredient in everything that he's buying us to eat at the venue, and every ingredient in anything that he's getting us drinks wise. And, you know, he's always there like, are you guys okay? If anything happens in the crowd, you need to let me know. I'll make sure, you know, because I mean, George and I've both been touched. It's just kind of par for the course as a woman in the industry. You're going to have horrible unwanted attention. And when I brought that to Stu at some point, he was just like, you tell me next time, they will be gone. Like, so he's like this, he even gets called Uncle Stu, like, by everybody. Like, it's just a thing because he's just so lovely and so attentive to everybody's needs. But yeah, I mean, those are just two very small examples. The women in the industry that I know that I work with are a great community. We all hype each other up online. We talk to each other. We respond to each other's posts, and, you know, there's a lot of kindness there as well. And I'm seeing more of that spread outwards in terms of some of the festivals we work with. Rebellion, for example, now has safe spaces for anybody feeling overwhelmed by crowds or uncomfortable in a room, or for any reason whatsoever. You can just go up to one of the stewards and be like, can you please take me to the safe space? And you are given a safe space. So yeah, there's lots of examples of kindness in the music industry. Of course, there's also lots of examples the other way, but there's definitely lots of positive moves forward right now.
Yeah. So I love Poor Man's Show, which mentions how our country is run by wealthy cavemen. And you sing about the homeless and the cost of living and cuts in healthcare, which is a really important song. And we need people like you to run the country. So can you remember writing that song, and what made you write it? I guess it's obvious.
Yeah. It was around the time that Theresa May was talking about replacing police on the force with iPads, and having more special officers on the streets rather than trained policemen with psychoanalysis and stuff like that. And it was also around the time that on New Year we had 4 stabbings just in London in one small area. And obviously the NHS has been deteriorating for a decade or so now, but there was a lot of moves towards that privatization around that same time when Theresa May was in office. And I just remember sitting there feeling violently angry and completely helpless, like just so benign, not being able to do anything that was going to positively affect all of these awful changes that were going on. We were also seeing a lot of police brutality at the time. So, you know, the sort of Black Lives Matter kind of movement started to come around that time. There was a lot of people of colour being really badly mistreated by police, and of course still happening. Nothing that's in that song has changed. So I still feel like it's benign, but my only way of expressing how angry I was to research some of the statistics that were going on around those subjects, and put them into verses.
Do you think we'll ever have someone running the country that actually cares about people?
I think the system is rigged. I don't know what the solution is. I don't know what kind of system we should have in place or how leaders should be chosen in order to make this better. But I definitely think the system at this point is very rigged. I don't think that the Labour leader at the moment is anything more than a soft Tory. I think the Green Party has some good policies, but we've never seen them in power. So I think there's a lot of trust issues there as to whether or not they would actually be able to manage their way out of a paper bag in terms of actually leading the country. And I mean, Lib Dem are just so on the fence and a bit wet lettuce, in my opinion, that I don't think they would make any difference either. So I feel like it's gotten to a point where it's a bit like America, like the lesser of two evils will be voted in. And that's if we're lucky. If we're not lucky, it'll be back to more Tories and more racist, homophobic, transphobic people like Suella Braverman and Rishi Sunak running the country still. So I wish I had a more positive outlook on it, but I don't see how to get out of the hole that we're in order to see a way forward where people are at the forefront, as in general people who are poor, people who are needing access to education and healthcare are at the forefront of our leaders' thinking.
So I love Panic as well, which is quite an environmentally conscious song, and it mentions the oceans crying out and trawl the bottom till marine life is all gone. The intro is quite interesting. Is it like a butcher trying to sell lamb chops and chicken? How did you come up with that, and what did you want to get across?
So it was actually my previous drummer, Alex. He now works in sound in film, and he was studying a degree at the time of sound in film. And he captured that at a market. And when this song was in development, it felt right that because we were talking about environmental issues in this song, to have something that was the opposite of that, the thing that was causing it. And the biggest cause, of course, of the environmental damage is huge meat farming. Like, it's something that's starting to be talked about a lot more by scientists in terms of what we need to change in order to cut that CO2, in order to replenish the rainforests and stuff. So it felt right to have something like that right at the beginning, to be like, this is what we're talking about, you know. And then you've got the little thing in the middle talking about having plastic in your lungs and stuff. That was actually me. I wrote that, and then I recorded it with a silly posh voice, like a newsreader voice, into my voice note, and that is actually the original voice note that was just mixed into the song.
So you've been writing songs since the age of 7. Do you remember the first really important song that you wrote?
No, I don't think I can remember anything that was particularly important. I don't think I really got particularly political, at least not that I can think of, before writing for the first album. For the first 2 EPs, I guess, because I would say Obsession Transgression is kind of political because it's talking about the beauty industry and beauty standards and trying to move away from feeling like you have to live up to them. So that's got a political edge to it, I guess. So that was probably around 2013, 2014 that I really started to do stuff like that. I probably did write some pseudo-political stuff before that. I don't think I really went, I'm allowed to do this, I'm allowed to use my voice. I don't just have to write pretty love songs. I don't have to be a pop artist. I don't have to sit inside a box in order for people to listen to my music. I have to write things that I believe in. So I guess I started writing things that I believed in probably as early as like 2010, 2011, 2012, when I first went solo, and stopped being a quote unquote acoustic pop artist, which I never wanted to be anyway.